Good evening. I'm Steve Kornacki at MSNBC headquarters in New York, and we are now 57 days away from Election Day. President Trump and Joe Biden are now at the most crucial stage of this campaign. They are focusing their attacks on a number of issues, including the economy, on this Labor Day weekend. The latest jobs report shows that more than 1.3 million jobs were gained, with the unemployment rate now at 8.4%. That is considerably higher than where it was before the coronavirus took hold, but it's also down from its pandemic peak of nearly 15% back in April. The nation is still down more than 11 million jobs since February, and today the president argued that his re-election would hasten recovery.
In 2021, we'll create 10 million jobs at least in the first 10 months. Joe Biden, the radical socialist Democrats, would immediately collapse the economy. If Joe Biden becomes president, China will own the United States. China is spending the money we give them to build up their military. We lose billions of dollars, and if we didn't do business with them, we wouldn't lose billions of dollars.
3 weeks ago in Bedminster, I asked you specifically why you have not called Democratic leadership to the White House to meet with them. If they want to meet, it's on them. A lot of people are criticizing you.
Let me just tell you, I know my customers. That's what I do. I know Pelosi, I know Schumer very well. They don't want to make a deal because they know that's good for the economy. And if they make a deal that's good for the economy, and therefore it's good for me for the election in November 3rd.
Former Vice President Biden slammed Trump's handling of the economic fallout from the coronavirus and the negotiations for another relief package.
He has been spending too much time on his golf courses and his sand traps. I can't think of any president in the middle of a crisis like this, and there's been other crises, both foreign and domestic, that has not called in the leadership of the Republican and Democratic parties to the White House, to the Oval Office, to sit and work out an agreement. But there's no desire to work out an agreement here. He's not even had a meeting with them.
And the Associated Press is reporting it's increasingly unlikely there'll be a quick revival of talks to craft another coronavirus relief bill when Congress returns. Meanwhile, Politico reports the nation is headed toward a two-track recovery with a growing economic divide that could, quote, fuel social unrest and extend any economic recession, and also have damaging implications for President Trump's re-election bid. Here for our lead-off discussion, Jonathan Allen, NBC News national political reporter, Shannon Pettypiece, senior White House reporter for NBC News Digital, and Jason Johnson, veteran journalist and contributor at the Grio and a professor at Morgan State University. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Shannon, let me start with you, because until February or so of this year, the expectation, not just around Trump, but around everybody in politics, was the economy was going to be the central message of a Trump re-election campaign. And I look at the polling right now. We just went through it. The polling overall is not a pretty picture for the president at this point, but he still gets his highest marks on the economy, and he still, the margins aren't huge, but he still tends to outpace Biden when it comes to the question of who better to handle the economy. How he plans to handle this issue in the final 2 months of this campaign, what message is he trying to take to voters here amidst all of the statistics we just went through?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to pick up on, because there has been this huge focus on crime, the tens of millions of dollars spent trying to elevate crime and law and order and safety as an issue in this election. It featured really prominently in the Republican convention. When you dig down into those poll numbers you were talking about, it didn't really move the needle on where people are about crime. Maybe it ticked up a little bit as an issue, but the economy and coronavirus remain the driving issues of this election, despite all the efforts by the president to elevate crime otherwise. I was talking to someone close to the campaign at the end of the last week about this, and they said the exact thing you were saying, that it is going to come back down to the economy, just like they always thought it would, and to listen and look for more of a message coming from Trump and the campaign on the economy. Now, this press conference the president had today was initially supposed to be about the economy. It was a Labor Day event. They were pegging on the economy. The president talked about that a little bit. But there's so many other things that overshadow their economic message because of the president's own message himself. And you cited some of those things, how this spiraled into Ukraine and China and attacking Biden and calling him stupid, that just detract from this economic message. So as much as the campaign, like they have for years now, has wanted this election to be about the economy, the president's message continues to diverge from that. And we're obviously running out of time where they can really settle on a consistent message.
Yeah, John, I'm curious what your sense is of how the Biden campaign is looking at this, because when you go through the polling again, it does look like the biggest potential vulnerability Biden has, that to the extent the electorate is focusing on the economy, that's where Trump, when you poll all these issues, stacks up best against him. Is your sense, when you look at the Biden campaign, that they are thinking the economy could end up playing a bigger role in this campaign, and they have a way of countering that advantage the president has right now? Or do you get a sense that they're confident, as Shannon's saying, there's so much else out there, not the least of which is the coronavirus, that the economy just is never going to reach that central role we expected it would?
I mean, the truth, Steve, is that the two things are completely related, and it's the argument that the Biden team is trying to make, that the economy is never really going to get back on track unless you get the coronavirus under control, that the economy is in the shape that it's in large part because the president was unable to get the coronavirus contained quickly early in the spring. You can almost hear the debate among Democrats about how do we handle this? How do we figure out how to go after what is Trump's strength right now? The one thing that he's really competitive, as you point out, competitive with Joe Biden on, is the economy. And it is the issue that voter after voter tells pollsters that they still see some strength for the president on. It's the one area where his handling is competitive with Biden. So if the Democrats could figure out how to, if I can borrow from the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai, if the Democrats could figure out how to sweep his leg on that issue, this campaign would be over. But it has been, for him, very stubbornly strong. And I think that the one thing he has done a very good job over the last 4 years of is talk about how he built up that economy before March, before the coronavirus. And he has continued, even through his Twitter escapades, to drive that message home.
Jason, one thing we were talking about last hour was the Trump campaign with this, telling us they want to focus so much on this idea of law and order, telling us Wisconsin, that's the state, that's the state of states when you look at where that would positively help their campaign. The numbers right now not showing that, and so the question is raised, will they alter their message? Will they downplay this? Will there be some sort of strategic response to what the polling is telling us? I want to flip that question around and ask you about it. What we're seeing in terms of the public's response in a state like Wisconsin to the Trump campaign's emphasis on law and order, what we're seeing right now, is that going to affect how the Democratic ticket talks and strategizes and what issues they choose to emphasize in the home stretch of this campaign?
Well, Steve, it already has, right? You had the Biden-Harris campaign come out with an ad last week talking about how they were listening, how they were concerned about these issues. But let's be honest, the Trump campaign doesn't have a message because they're not really running a campaign. And his law and order message, or his fear Antifa, fear black people message, you know how we would know if that's effective above and beyond the polls? If Ron Kind in Wisconsin or Connor Lamb were concerned about it. Marginal Democrats in the Midwest aren't worried yet. If they start leaking to Politico and saying, hey, Joe Biden needs to spend more time in Minnesota, Joe Biden needs to spend more time in Wisconsin, then we would know that Trump was making any sort of room, and he hasn't. He hasn't been able to move anything, primarily because no matter what message the president comes up with, it doesn't work in rebranding Joe Biden, and it doesn't change the daily reality. Look, regular people don't care about the jobs numbers. What they recognize is that when they're still going to work every day, if they've kept their job, that their kids are right next to them in the house because they can't go to school yet. What they recognize is if I still have a job, I haven't been able to go to the movies because of COVID. The president doesn't have a message on COVID. Joe Biden does, and that's what's going to dominate the conversation no matter how many things Trump tries to switch it to.
Shannon, let me broaden the discussion here about how folks in the campaigns are looking at this to not just the presidential campaigns, but the Senate. Battle for control of the Senate. We've been talking about that, too. Democrats trying to pick up the Senate. They have this idea, this hope of Biden gets elected president. They hang on to the House, maybe increase their majority there, and they get the Senate to give them some ability, some latitude to govern next year. When you talk to Democrats and Republicans looking at how this presidential race is going to impact the Senate races. What are you hearing right now?
One thing interesting I have been hearing has been coming from donors who are shifting some of their money from that they would have given to the presidential campaign to Senate races, because there's a sense that, maybe the presidential contest is gone or it's too big of a risk, and they want to focus their attention instead to trying to hold on to the Senate should they lose the White House, because of this fear that Democrats pick up ground in the Senate as well as the House. I mean, there's obviously many, many nervous Senate candidates out there. Joni Ernst in Iowa, who spoke at the Republican convention, Martha McSally in Arizona, in traditionally red states. The numbers really indicate that Republican senators have something to worry about, and even the donors are sensing that and trying to figure out, okay, maybe we need to focus on shoring up these Senate races at the time being.
Yeah, John, is there a temptation there, I guess is the word there might be, for the Biden campaign and for Democrats, again, looking ahead, if he were to win, to the idea of giving him some added clout there on Capitol Hill to govern with? I think back to the closing days of the 2016 campaign, and the Clinton folks were thinking, hey, we can maybe get Arizona, and they forgot about Wisconsin. Are there any temptations you're seeing for the Democrats that they might be falling for that are comparable this time, or do you think they've learned their lessons from 2016?
The next 2 months will tell, Steve, about whether they're going to have learned those lessons. But I think they are certainly much more aware of the dangers of temptation of spending too much money on races that they can't win or that might be, tangential to the presidential election. Obviously, there are get-out-the-vote campaigns in states where you have Senate elections and are important to the presidential election, where you can sort of kill two birds with one stone. But the path to 270 electoral votes has got to be the focus of certainly the Biden campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and a lot of those big outside groups, number one. One other thing I just sort of wanted to mention to Jason's point, I spoke to Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy the other day, from Orlando, one of the big Blue Dog Coalition members, one of the leaders of the moderate Democrats in the House. And she was pointing out, not only are those moderate Democrats not telling Joe Biden that he needs to come to their states, when was the last time you remember an election cycle going through where there weren't candidates for the Democrats out there openly campaigning against their presidential candidate? There are no Democrats distancing themselves from Joe Biden in any way. That's really, really unusual. At this point in the cycle, typically, there's at least a handful of Democrats saying, look, I don't really want to be with this Democratic nominee. We're not seeing any of that this time.
One thing I am seeing, Jason, that is interesting to me in the polling, when you look deep inside it and you ask voters not who they want to win the presidential election, but who they think will win the presidential election, there's a bit of a disconnect there, because we show Joe Biden ahead by about 7 points on average in the horse race. But then when you ask folks who's going to win, Trump leads on that question right now. And I was looking really at the crosstabs. There are a fair number of Democrats who are saying, I'm for Biden, but I think Trump is going to win. Is that sort of just protective psychology there among Democrats, for lack of a better term? Or do you see some genuine risks here in the closing days, closing weeks of the campaign that could still allow Trump to pull this off? And what would they be if you do?
Well, yeah. So, Steve, none of these are about risk. One, Democrats tend to be more paranoid. Republicans are way overconfident. Democrats tend to be paranoid and pessimistic. So that's kind of a general thing. But Donald Trump is cheating. I think we can't ever talk about this race without saying the president of the United States is not running a campaign. He is simply consolidating power. That no matter what the polls say, when Debbie Wasserman Schultz can't inspect, she's on the oversight committee and can't inspect a mail collecting location because they put soldiers there and say you can't come in. When the same thing is happening in Michigan, Democrats are very worried about the president of the United States using the post office to steal this election. So that's where that cynicism comes from. That's why the Biden campaign's big push has been, hey, make sure you get your vote in, make sure you drop it off at a polling location. That is where the concern is. It's not that people want Donald Trump to get reelected. It's because they see him cheating and they see a Republican Party that is helping him in the process around the country.
Yeah, it's a fascinating change about, because I was looking 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton led, but it was a smaller margin, and yet overwhelmingly folks said they expected her to win. Now the margin bigger, But certainly the expectation is much more in Trump's favor. Just an interesting thing you see when you look at these polls. John Allen, Shannon Pettypiece, Jason Johnson, thank you all for being with us. Really appreciate that. Coming up, a look at what it's really like on college campuses right now. Vaughn Hilliard's going to give us a report from the Hawkeye State, Iowa, and later, presidential historian Michael Beschler